Up until this point, just to give them some context of what they're seeing on the screen at the moment, this was a shared image, and we enabled the annotation tools, and we went through showing people where to find those. There is a screenshot at the bottom right-hand corner as to where you would find that on the toolbar. It would be at the top of most people's screens if they're using a laptop and a Windows device, and they would find it under the view options. There's an item called annotate, and when you enable these annotations, you should see a secondary toolbar up here, which gives you the drawing tools and a color palette, and you can collaboratively draw and effectively color in or annotate on a shared screen. And before we just move on, Shonali, would you just like to recap, because we didn't capture it on the recording, the purpose of doing something which seems apparently fun, and what the benefits of this would be?
So I would just think that at the moment we need to build in little opportunities for frivolity and creativity and play with our classes, because they are going to be struggling to find ways of doing that. It's a way of just building another level of contact, which is what we're here to talk about today.
Excellent. Thanks, Shonali. So as you said, now we've saved a snapshot of this. So we've kept that. Now we're going to move on to the next slide. But what we're going to do as an experiment, just to show you, is we're going to move on, and we're not going to clear the annotations that we've actually done here. So we're going to see what's going to happen when we actually move on to the next slide. Wow, we have an interesting collaboration there. How do we get rid of this, Shonali?
So Kath, what you would need to do is you would need to go to clear annotations, and that will be on your screen. You would need to go to annotate again. So up at the top of Kath's screen, she'll go to annotate, and then she will click on the at the end of the annotations toolbar, there's an opportunity to delete or clear annotations, and she'll go clear all, which means that, so the way to think about this particular tool is it's the shared screen acts like almost like a clear filter over your slides, and people are drawing on that clear filter. So whatever you have underneath, whether it's a slide or whether it's a website page or whether it's a picture of a drawing or whether it's a PDF, people are annotating the Zoom screen above that, almost the clear Zoom layer above that. So you can do all sorts of different things with it. Imra, I hope that answers your question. Cool. But welcome, folks. We are here, Kath and me, to talk about first contact. Kath, do you want to introduce yourself, or did that happen in my absence?
No, it did not happen in your absence. We have not introduced ourselves. We've basically just been playing around with the tools so far. Let me switch my video on. I'll just do this very briefly. We won't keep the videos on all the time because we are aware that we have people joining us on different devices and different bandwidth allocations. So just to see that I am a real person, just to say hi to everyone. And I am Kath. I'm going to be presenting with Shonali today about first contact. And thanks to everybody for joining us. It was great actually coloring in with you, and I hope you enjoyed that small activity. And we are going to be exploring quite a few other options, ways in which you can make contact with your students. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to Shonali.
Thanks, Kath. And for anybody who hasn't met me yet, hi. Good to meet you all. I tend to keep my camera off for a couple of reasons. One, it gets in the way very often of what's happening on the slides. And second of all, I find looking at myself very distracting. So I'm going to stop my video. If you are somebody who wants your students to continue to see what you're doing with your face or hands, you can also hide your self-view. So if you go to the three dots just above your name, you can, if it's really distracting for you to see yourself, and dear Lord, it often is, because you're thinking, I make such funny faces when I talk, you can hide your self-view. So that's what I'm going to do for today, actually. I'm going to hide my self-view, but I'm going to leave my camera on so that for anybody who needs a camera, that it's there. So welcome to everybody who's in the room. Good to have you here today. As we've said, we're chatting a little bit about first contact. Kath, I think I want to send everybody away to breakaway rooms to do that little activity. So Kath is going to set up our break, put us into the next slide. We're going to try out a little tool with you today that some of you will have experienced already, and a little pedagogy, a little teaching technique that you can use with your students. This is a tool that in the literature and in the kind of material is called a mad tea or a wild tea. Usually you do 2 or 3 rounds. Because we're in quite a limited time frame today, we're only going to do 1. But we're going to pop you into a breakout room, and I would like you to think about for yourself as a human being, just for you, not for Shanali, the SALT employee, or Michelle, the sociology person, just for you. What is something that really brings you joy? Okay, so you're going to go into your breakout rooms. That's going to happen in a mere moment. And what you are going to need to do for me while you're in your breakout rooms, you will be joined by sort of 2 other people. So that we'll have about 3-ish people in each, 2 or 3 people in each breakout room. And I'm going to ask you to respond to the question, what brings you joy? You are going to be in the breakout rooms very briefly, folks, 4 minutes, all right? Just enough to say, hey, how's it doing? This is who I am. This is what sparks joy. Okay, so popping into breakout rooms now. You should get a little invite. See you all back here in about 4 minutes. Welcome back, everybody. Okay, so today's webinar, what we're very much trying to do is we're trying to move between talking about things and doing things that might be an opportunity for us to think about, well, how can we do this ourselves in our own classes? So very much breakout rooms are something that can be a fantastic way to just break up a session, a fantastic way to give your students an opportunity to make contact with each other. And you can either do it as we've done for a very short period, just to help people to understand who's in the room with them. Or you can do it for a longer period of time if you need to have students work on a particular formative task together, or like a substantive piece of work together. Okay, Kath, can we have the next screen, please? Thank you so much. So folks, we're going to be working today in 4 little blocks. We're going to chat about some techniques that you can use around introductions in the early part of your course. So we were thinking, when Kath and I were working on this, we were sort of thinking about the first like week to 2 weeks of a course, when it's quite new and people are still figuring themselves out. Okay, so just to be aware that we're working in these 4 little blocks. We're going to look at introductions. We're going to look at some activities that can help you to get to know your students better. And we're going to look at some common ways of working that you need to establish in that first period of time. And then some additional support that you need to just make available to your students. Okay, so Kath, can we move into the first section, please? Alrighty then, just a quick response to what's happening in the text chat. Michelle, the difference between Teams and Zoom in terms of access, Zoom is actually the more accessible of the 2. So with a URL, you can get anybody into a Zoom room. With Teams, there are various constraints around kind of device and breakout rooms. So if students are coming in on a smartphone rather than a laptop or a desktop, there's sometimes some problems with breakout rooms. If they're coming into Teams on the wrong account, there's definitely a problem with breakout rooms. So if breakout rooms are something that you substantially want to do, you have to prep them in Teams much more carefully than you have to in Zoom. Also, if you've got a very big class, sometimes Zoom is better if you want to preset breakout rooms. But yes, it's possible. In my opinion, it just needs a bit more preparation, but it's definitely doable. Okay, so in today's little time slot on introductions, we're going to look at 3 spaces for introduction that you need to make in the first couple of weeks with your students. And the first one is introducing yourself to your students. You are going to have to do some very deliberate and explicit work around introducing yourself to your students in a way that possibly you haven't really thought about in the past. You're also going to have to do some matchmaking facilitation work, and you're going to have to create opportunities to introduce students to each other, right? To facilitate students actively interacting with each other. You're going to have to do some introducing of your students to your course, or at least your course to your students. And ideally, we want to say, just as a kind of principle, that all introductions should be absolutely authentic. And by authentic, I mean, we're going to make some suggestions today, but you have to do what's right for you. So I'm a firm believer in walking into my class as much as possible as a whole human being, with all of my flaws and failings as well as all of my strengths, because I think that that creates a space that allows my students to do the same. But some people are way more comfortable in a slightly more formal arrangement with their students. So you figure out a way of representing yourself over the next few activities that feels authentic for you. Good introduction should also be active though. So anything where your students are just sitting back and listening, it's not really a great introduction. It's a step in the right direction, but ideally build some element of activity into it. And for me, this whole introduction process is really about initiating connection. So it's an opportunity for us to think about, well, how do we help our students to connect with us and connect with others? Because that connection really underpins the learning relationship. Kath, next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to offer you some, actually we're going to start with a question. How do you introduce yourself to your students? What have you done in the recent past, in the distant past? How do you introduce yourself to your students? What do you do? And I'm going to invite anybody who would like to unmute to grab the mic and unmute and talk to us in your voice. And for anybody who would prefer to jump into the text chat, that's always an option. So what do you do to introduce yourself to your students?
I think I can jump in there, Shanali, and I can say that on the courses that I'm involved with, the way that we connect with people, and these are primarily postgrad students, is that we initially make contact sort of asynchronously through sort of emails and things like that, but that can be slightly impersonal, and you always want to have another personal aspect as well. So that is a way of providing context. But what we definitely do is we do have a synchronous, as soon as possible, we set up some kind of synchronous meeting, and we actually put our cameras on as well, so that we can get together in real time, regardless of where we are around the world, and we can actually see that there is another human person on the other side. We are obviously, as we were with this meeting, conscious that using cameras all the time can be bandwidth intensive. So we do it just for a little bit at the beginning, just to see each other and see each other's faces. And then we always round off the meeting with what we call because we have people joining us from across Africa and other countries, is we call it the wave across Africa. We get everyone to switch on their camera and actually wave at the end. And I usually record that as a little GIF, and I send it out to them so that we can see each other waving to each other. So it does bring that kind of additional element of contact to be able to see someone and actually be together at the same space in time synchronously. So that works for our introductions, and we follow that through to subsequent meetings as well.
Cool. Thank you, Kath. I just want to pick up on what people were typing in text chat. So in the text chat, Yashima's saying, pre-COVID, you just introduce yourself in front of the class and say who you are. Absolutely. Like normally, like next to no thought goes into this. You walk into the front of the classroom and you go, hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm here to do this. Renee has a variation on that. She's like, it's normally quite formal. Who you are, your educational trajectory, ask them to introduce themselves. And then Nilakshmi has a really nice, sorry, I'm looking at only part of names here, so I apologize. Nilakshi has a version of that where she gets people to introduce themselves with 3 keywords that define you. Okay, Imra is saying it helps when you bring in your own research so that they understand how a first-year course provides a foundation for future endeavors within the field. Absolutely. So we've got to figure out really a balancing act between how to present ourselves in our professional selves to our students, in our academic selves, but also figure out how to bring elements of who you are as a human being into that process. Because particularly for undergraduate students and particularly for first years, our academic selves can be quite distant and quite intimidating in some ways. And particularly in the online space where it's difficult to figure out things like, oh, my lecturer likes the same shoes as me. Or my lecturer likes to come to class, you know, hugging their cup of tea as they walk in the door. Like the small things that humanize us are often quite hard to find in the online space. So that's something that we would need to consider. Things to think about, consider modes. There, you could do text, so you could do an opening, like a little letter to your class. I think about them as like my first love letters. So it's my first love letter to my class. Or my first like high pen pal, like figure out a way of framing it that makes sense for you. You could consider an image. You could ask your class to put together a collage of things that are important to them, and you do a collage as well, and you share that with your class. You could do an audio. There have been lots of people who've gone like, I hate like doing video, but actually I don't mind doing a little audio note. So then they sit with their phone on their couch in the evening and they make a little greeting for their class, and they just upload it to Vula. And make it a clickable link so their class can get hold of it. And then some people go the whole hog and do the video. And for some folks, it's a super formal. They set up a whiteboard in a corner of their garage or their home, and they pretend that they're in front of a classroom, and they get dressed in kind of fairly formal clothes, and they record themselves doing that. And for other people, it's a quick recording while they're out with their dog doing their evening walk around. The key thing is to get the tone right for you, whatever that means. Different things for different people, but it's got to be something that reflects how you want to engage with your class. And then as I've kind of been hinting at, I just want to kind of emphasize that the kind of smooth professionalism that we all want to pitch for online, where we sound very much like newsreaders and we look quite professional and formal, is both about safety, or is really fundamentally about creating something that feels safe for us, but is also highly dangerous because it doesn't create the kind of open conditions that are really, really positive for learning. So what I'm saying is challenging, I'm sorry, but do consider how you might tread the tightrope between a very professional self and a perhaps excessively open self in a way that felt right for you, that would allow your students to connect with you. Cool. Thank you, Kath. Can we go next slide? Thank you so much. So we're not going to spend a great deal of time on the slide because it's kind of the things that I've talked about already, but there are on the slide, there's some tools and some resources that might help you to make some choices about what you would want to share with your students as a kind of open and introductory moment. I've been playing around with Canva recently, find that really useful. The guy who talks about introduction videos up here is incredibly good. He talks about, I think he talks about introduction videos in a way that's accessible, but that is also appealing. Okay, thank you, Kath. Can we bounce on a slide? So we've talked about introducing ourselves to our students, but we also need to talk about introducing our students to each other. And there are a couple of options that we want to suggest here. Normally, we rely on the fact that if you put a bunch of 20-somethings together in a room together, the primary thing they're going to want to do is to like get to know each other before everything else. But there is something about the COVID experience and something about the online experience that means that perhaps students don't get to know each other in the ways that we would like. So we need to make sure that we are creating conditions in our digital classrooms for our students to really get to know each other as students, as scholars, or as potential scholars, as people exploring a discipline, as opposed to some of the other identities they may inhabit in the world. So some techniques you can use. You can try the idea of a student gallery, and we're going to give you a little look. No, we're not going to show you what a student gallery looks like, but there are lots of examples out there. A good tool for a student gallery is Padlet, and that is available to you in the kind of UCT suite of tools at the moment. You can encourage your students to do interviews and then introduce each other on the basis of that. So you can pop people into breakout rooms in Zoom or MS Teams, give them 10 minutes in there to get 8 minutes in there to get to know each other, and then come back and share something they have in common. Come back and introduce your student to the class and so on. The student interviews are probably something that you want to do in touch groups or in small groups. Not a good idea for 1,500 students, but you could send them away to do an interview and come back and share something in the text. That would work for a big class as well. You could do the kind of mad or wild tea idea that we started with today. You could challenge your students to play kind of classroom bingo, where they each submit something about themselves and then they have to find somebody else in the group who shares their perspective on something. And you could also think about things like students making kind of introduction pages, which could be they have to do it via email or through Canva or slides or something like that. So there are a lot of different techniques that you might use and some tools that are paired with those that would be quite useful for helping your students to get to know each other. Because definitely coming out of last year, one of the things we heard from students is that they felt very isolated. And I don't think that that's necessarily going to go away as quickly as we would like this year. Thanks so much. Kath, can we go on to the next slide? So our next sort of suggestion was make sure that you introduce your course to your students. And we have a couple of suggestions for you about how you might do this. So you might simply consider recording an introduction to your course with some slides yourself. So you could walk your students through your Vula site. You could walk them through some slides that explain the purpose of the course and the kind of teaching vision for the course and key assessment issues in the course. And then you could simply upload that to the lecture videos tool on Vula and link it in your course outline page. And that is a way for your students to see you engaging with the course, which is quite nice. You could do something similar where you take your course outline, create it in a Google Doc and upload it to a lessons page, embed it on a lessons page, and then make sure that you have the anyone can comment function on in the Google Doc. And then your students can actually comment on what that looks like for them. And we'll show you an example of that in a second. Or you could do something like an annotated PDF using the hypothesis tool, which is available to you. So Kath, can I ask you to move on to the next slide so we can look at some of those examples? Thank you. So on your screen at the moment is an example of, I just grabbed a reading here because that's what we'd used in another course. But students can highlight and comment. So that's the hypothesis tool in Vula being used to comment on a PDF. So that's very accessible as a course outline with comments. Or Kath, if we may move on to the next slide. An alternative to that is this idea of the embedded Google Doc. So this is a Google Doc embedded in a Vula site, and students can simply click on the doc and comment on it. So again, perhaps slightly tricky for a very large class, but fantastic for postgraduate classes if you want students to have a look at the kind of big course outline in advance. Or you could set it as an introductory TUT activity, where you say to students, for your first TUT, in your TUT groups, go and look at this Google Doc and comment on it, and you simply have as many iterations of the doc as you have TUT groups. Tricky perhaps if you have 90 TUT groups, but there are very few courses that operate at that kind of size. And you could ask your tutors to manage that. Okay, thank you so much. Kath, over to you.
Thanks, Shonali. So you've had quite a lot of a look at quite a lot of different activities and ideas of how to connect. So now we're going to go a little bit more granular and think about getting to know each other better. So as Shonali said that there's various components meeting in sort of a virtual space. So it's not just about you getting to know your students, it's students getting to know you and students getting to know other students as well. So primarily in this online space, remember that it's not all going to be synchronous. You're going to have asynchronous moments as well. So probably there's going to be more asynchronous moments than synchronous moments. So you need to think about how you're going to operate in these two different kinds of ways and different spaces. Even though they're both in the online environment, it's a different way of operating, basically. So ways to actually touch base with your students. And remember, this whole thing that we're thinking about right now is not really engaging with the course content or getting to know a particular tool or thinking about technicalities. It's really about connecting with the human. So it's the human on the one side connecting with another human in ways where, as Shonali mentioned before, pre-COVID, you could just walk into your classroom and you could connect on many levels very easily. Now you have to use the other channels and environments that are available to you. And how do you still maintain and get in touch with that human element in this new space? So thinking about asynchronously, first of all, because this is probably going to be most of your course content, because people would have to engage with the course content in a flexible way. As Shonali also mentioned earlier on, people may not always be available at the same time to get together for synchronous activities. They might have to work their studies in around other commitments that they have. So there's going to be a large asynchronous component. So how can you touch base and still have that connection where you connect with a person on a human level and build that bond and that sense of community? So some of the activities that you could think about doing could be something like the story of your name. So you can see by doing that, you're touching on something that's relevant to everybody, that everybody can relate to. And this can be the real story of your name, or you can actually make it completely fictitious and say, let's get completely creative and let's work up a story of your name. How did you arrive at being named who you are? Is there a history about it? It could be real or imaginary, as we said, and tell us that story. So because this is now asynchronous, you've got to think, what kind of tool can I use to actually facilitate this interaction? And because primarily people will be using Vula, it might be a good idea to actually use this opportunity to familiarize themselves with the tools that are available within Vula. So within the forum area, there's actually a voice recorder tool. So you could actually pose the question in the forum and say, tell us the story about your name. And you can decide there if you want to make it either imaginary or real, or you can even leave it up to them and say, tell us the story and we'll maybe guess if this is a real story or an imaginary story. And they could use their voice recorder tool to actually leave a voice note for all the other participants to listen to. And because you're doing it in the forum and your voice note will then become a post within the forum, other students then once they've listened to that, respond and comment and reply on that as well. So the initial post can be via voice, and you can follow that up with responses in text format within the forum. Another way to connect with people on a more human level and just find out what they're all about, their likes, their dislikes, is to just simply ask them a question. And this can be really something as quick and easy as literally asking them one quick question and asking them for a very quick response. So it could even be something as simple as your favorite music, just to see the variety of likes of different musics, or maybe you'll find amazing discoveries of similar music that you all like. And the quick way to do this, again, if you're going to be using Vula, you can use a poll, but an even easier option to use within Vula, on lessons page, there's an option called question. And you can actually just ask them a very quick question. It's a very quick way of asking sort of just one question and getting a quick response from them. Another way to touch base, as we said, I mentioned that it's really nice to get to see people, and we did turn on our videos, cameras at the start of the session, is to be able to actually see a picture of a person. So Shonali mentioned the gallery earlier on, and a really nice way to do this is to use Padlet. So Padlet can be embedded within Vula. It was one of the new tools that is being piloted at the start of this year. It's one of the 4 new tools. We've had quite a few webinars around how to use this, and it is a very intuitive and easy tool to use. And as I said, does embed really well within Vula, but it is not data free because it is actually a third-party tool, but it uses minimal data. So it is really nice to be able to use this. And you can ask them to add pictures of themselves and to add a little bit of text about themselves. So it can be almost like a very informal bio or just a brief introduction of themselves to the class. And on Padlet, you can also enable comments and responses and reactions. So it elicits that response between students reading other people's introductions on the Padlet and getting that back and forth communication going, and adding the picture really makes all the difference. You can also on Padlet add other things like voice notes and video as well. But if you want to still get the visual, but try and keep the data down, then a picture would be preferable. And then other things you can do is have things like quest activities. So essentially on a quest, as the name implies, you're going on a voyage of discovery. And really here, I mean, you can be as creative as you want to. But if you use this within Vula itself, it actually at the same time in terms of them finding their way around is actually familiarizing themselves with the environment as well. So it gets them to go to different places within Vula. It helps to link them to different tools, see how different tools interact, and you can really have a lot of fun with this. So these are all ideas where you can actually get to touch base with somebody else as a human, have those touch points, and it works very well in an asynchronous environment. The flip side of that would obviously be synchronous. So synchronous is those times where you're actually coming together, you're in the same space at the same time. And as I said, this is probably going to be less of the proportion of your course time, but nonetheless, these are actually very, very special times. And I'm sure, like as you are here in this webinar right now, being able to be in the same space at the same time is actually, it's a very different dynamic to working asynchronously. So there's a number of activities which you can actually do here that work really well. And as I've mentioned in the text chat, we will be sharing all these links with you, which are embedded on the slides, which do give you quite a bit of background as to how to implement these ideas. You might actually, upon review, decide to not implement the idea exactly as presented, but it might spark some creative ideas in you where you see, oh, I can use certain elements of these activities and I'm going to adapt it slightly for my context or my group of students or a particular tool that I'm going to use to actually accomplish this task. So one of the activities is what we call spiral journaling. Another one, which we're going to have a quick look at now, is the surrealist drawing introductions. And another one is called 4 ideas for checking in. So we're going to briefly have a look at that. And I know I'm going quite fast at this point because our webinar time is ticking by. But as I said, the links are all embedded in the slides, which we will share with you. So you can go back at any time and find out more information about each of these activities. But just briefly giving you an idea about the spiral journaling. Here is where you can do this in an online environment and you can still use what I call analog tools like paper and pencil. So you fold your paper into 4 areas and you get people to respond to prompt questions. So this can be done live in breakouts, or you can get them to do this and actually bring it to and kind of report back on this. But the prompt questions would be things like, right now my body is feeling, and they would respond to that, the challenges, the best things that have happened, and this semester I'm hopeful about. So just to get them to think more broadly about them and their engagement with the course content, not from a purely academic point, but as a human engaging with the course, how they're actually feeling right then at that point in time. This one is the drawing that we talked about. So this is actually getting to know people better and actually drawing portraits of them. And you might think that this is predisposed to people who are extremely artistic, but it is not, because this activity is actually done by you using your non-dominant hand. And it's all about getting to know the other person, and being able to draw your perspective of that person and then communicating that back and even having a feedback session about that. So as you can see here, this can work well in breakout rooms, and we experienced breakout rooms a little earlier. And you can also add questions to it as well. And this leads nicely into the next activity where you can actually get to know each other better by asking particular prompt questions. So you can have 4 questions, or you can adapt it slightly, 3 or 5, whatever you want to. And then you can do these in different ways. So you can literally just ask them in the text chat to say, how are you feeling today? Please enter your response into the text chat. You could do it through a visual way. So students could use messages or even annotation to show exactly how they are feeling right now. And you can also use word clouds. So you can get people to feedback certain particular keywords, and you can use tools such as WooClap. So WooClap is another one of our tools that we're piloting this first semester, and that is something that can actually collate all of that feedback, those words, and present it as a lovely visual word cloud. So right now that you know how to use annotation tools, this would be an example of using annotation tools to actually indicate on an image exactly how you are feeling right now. So do you remember at the start of this webinar, we asked you to activate or to use the annotation tools? So if you go to the annotation tools now and you can find the stamp tool, you can actually stamp on this picture right now exactly how you are feeling. So you could take the stamp tool and you could just stamp it wherever you want to. So if you would like to do that right now, thank you, Yasmina. You feeling happy? Lee, great, okay. Right, and as you can see everybody adding their feedback onto the visual. So it's a very quick snapshot way of actually just eliciting that response from people. And that's basically what we're after, is having that connection where you're throwing out a question, eliciting a response, and getting that back very quickly in real time. Great. I'm just going to clear these drawings quickly because you all know what happens if you move on to the next slide without clearing the drawings.
Kath, okay, Kath is cleared. Okay,
Sorry.
no worries.
Sorry.
No worries.
Yeah, I was just a bit wary about
no problem.
The time.
I hear you.
Right, and now we are going to just move on fairly quickly to Shonali again, who's going to tell us a little bit more about different common ways of working.
So what I want to just invite us to do, though, is to hover for 10 seconds, and I'll speed up the common ways to make it work. There were a lot of folks who in that drawing were scattered around some of the sads and the angries and the a little bit dejecteds. And I just want to encourage you that if you are a little bit sad or dejected or any of those things, and if it is something that we can do anything about, please can I ask you to just pop it into the text chat or send us an email, and we will do what we can to support you. I'm hoping that those feelings, very selfishly, I'm hoping that those feelings are not about what you're experiencing here now and are perhaps related to some of the big and scary things in the world. But if they are, please tell us so that we can do something about it. So if you want to pop into the text chat any questions or comments, we're really there for that. Also, please feel free to interact and unmute and mic on and tell us what's going on. Okay, I'm going to leave that invitation out there. Feel free to jump in. So Kath, can I have the next slide, please? Thank you so much. So folks, in this sort of common ways of working section, we're going to look at 3 things that we think you need to do, either at the beginning of the course, at various points in the course, and so on, that will really help your students to feel connected to you and the course. So this first one is really around being explicit about course expectations. And I think that one of the things that happens is that often we share this information with students almost spontaneously during lectures, on the way out of lectures. We'll scribble things up on the boards so that students know, don't forget what to do, etc. So Elrina, thank you very much for the question. What's a live course outline? So you can either set your course outline in stone at the beginning of the course. Then you PDF it and you send it to your students via email or into their Bula class sites. But you'll have seen that one of the things that I do is that I have a course outline that we shared earlier in the session that was a Google Doc. And what that does is it allows you a little bit of flexibility and one version, one place where the truth lives, which I find very helpful, especially in this kind of changeable mode. So I would encourage you, rather than having a Word document of the course outline or PDF of the course outline, which you have to then keep updating and sending to students. I'm a big fan of doing that. Embed your Google Doc on a lessons page, and when things change it on there. Say to students, this is the place you go. This is the place that's always live. That's always the most correct answer I can give you. So yeah, so that's what I would suggest. Be explicit about your course expectations in terms of have a good course outline in a place where students can find it. Have an assessment schedule that is clearly visible to your students from the beginning. So use a lessons page to create a map of all your course assessments, including marks, etc., and make that very visible to your students. Also, talk to them about it. In your once every or twice every week emails, remind people, in 10 days' time, there's a test coming up here. In 3 days' time, there's a hand in there. So make that stuff visible to students. Kath, can I move us on to the next slide? Related to that is this idea of establishing a working schedule with your students. And one of the things that's very difficult about the COVID experience, I feel, is that very often we are not working at the same time as our students. They are not working at the same time as us or each other. And there's a lot of uncertainty around it. So you can very helpfully specify a minimum number of working hours for your students. A lot of our students have no idea that if they are carrying, for example, a 30 credit course over the semester, that in our heads, that kind of equates to about 300 hours of work. So specify for your students, you know what, this is about this many hours of work, because they don't have a good rule of thumb for that. They've always just shown up at school and been at school whether they were working or not. So helping them to manage that is really useful. Be very specific about things like synchronous times, deadlines, and dates. And one of the things that can help you do that is to, as we've said, use the Vula Lessons tool for a course outline, but also use the Vula Calendar tool. This is an omission on that slide. Use Outlook. If you're going to have synchronous meeting times with your students, send them an Outlook calendar invite, or get your tutor or your TA to do it for you. It can be an incredibly powerful way for keeping people on track. Kath, next slide, please. Thank you. And then finally, one of the things that we strongly suggest that you think about doing with your students is creating classroom agreements. So in the past, we would have talked about things like classroom rules or ground rules. I guess classroom agreements is the slightly more inclusive version of that. So it's an opportunity, regardless of the kind of shape of your class or the structure of your class, for students to think with you about what would create a conducive classroom environment, and what that means for how you show up, and what that means for how they show up, and what that means for how they interact with each other. And we've made some suggestions there about what that could look like. So you could simply create an open access blank Jamboard, add the link to your Google site, to your Vula site, and ask your students to add to that anonymously two ideas each for what should be our classroom agreements with each other. You can then collate those, shape those, and say to them, these are the 10 things overall that people decided. You could do something similar with a kind of text chat in Zoom or MS Teams, or you could simply do a Google Doc where you ask people to work on creating those together. Okay, so those are some of the things that you can do towards establishing common ways of working. The critical takeaway from this, though, is that you really do need to think about what are the ways in the first 2 weeks that we can coax our students into understanding common territory. Okay, Kat, back to you.
Thanks, Janali. So now we are going to briefly have a look at additional support. So as Shanali said earlier on, when we did that visual feedback on how are you feeling right now, and we added the little stamp tool, Shanali did extend an invitation to you to let us know if there are ways that we can support you in any of the ideas that you would like to implement, or things that are just finding challenging at the moment. We are definitely here to support you in that venture. So in the way that you will be supporting your students, you also need support as well. So we're going to look at some of the additional ways that we can offer support. So there are student support services, and these are just a few of the key ones that we've highlighted here. And there are far more available, and one good place to actually find where all these services are available in one place is when you initially go to Vula, before you've even logged in, on the left-hand side, and it's a page that's accessible to everybody, so you do not need to be logged into Vula to see this. You will find a student support services tab there on the left-hand side, and this is just a selection, as I say, of some of the services that are available to you. Some of these you may be familiar with, and it is good to be able to direct students to the relevant person that can actually help in a particular instance. So in that way, you do need to touch base with your students frequently. If there are challenges that they express to you, know where to direct them if you can't resolve that immediately yourself. And you may also need to touch base with students that don't come to you immediately. So by virtue of their absence or their non-interaction, you might need to follow up with those students, touch base with them, and find out what challenges they are experiencing at that time and how best to resolve those. So what else can we do? What's next in terms of support and resources? So from SILT's side of things, on the homepage, on the SILT homepage, there are a number of tiles that you will see, and I've highlighted just 3 particular tiles. There are quite a few more, so I would really encourage you to visit the SILT website to see what is an offer and what it is that we can support you with, because there's various different aspects. So 3 tiles I would like to highlight are the support and services tile, the resources tile, and the webinars and workshop tile. As I said, this is available on the home page. So in terms of support and services, we do offer one-on-one consultations, and this is good to be able to book a consultation with a SILT learning designer. So that will be a one-on-one session that either happens in Teams or in Zoom, and we can support you with your particular challenge that you are working with in Vula, or if it's not a challenge and you just want to bounce some ideas, you're welcome to do that as well. So that's something that quite a few people have taken up, and I would encourage you to do that, to touch base with somebody that can help you on a personal level in your particular site. We do also have Vula help for the technicalities pertaining to Vula itself. There's also the online teacher community, which is a team within lives within MS Teams, and you're welcome to join that as well. We do have a lot of teaching resources as well, which I'll elaborate a little bit more on the next slide. And this is in fact a webinar that you are in at the moment, and there is a page dedicated to workshops and webinars where all our latest upcoming workshops and webinars are publicized, and we encourage you to keep an eye on that because we have quite a lot on offer. And then we do have other offerings where we can either do bespoke or guided course design as well. And in terms of resources, there's quite a large number of resources covering many, many different aspects, all the way from technicalities to tool orientated, to getting started, to course design, to engagement. And these are in a variety of media, from documents to videos to slide presentations to recorded audio elements. So there's a variety of different resources available covering a really broad spectrum of different topics. So we'd really encourage you to go and have a look at those resources and see what is available for you to support you in that regard. So here is just an example of some of the resources that are available. You will find them presented like this, and it will make it explicit as to whether they are documents or videos and exactly what the topic is of those resources. And the webinars and workshops, those are updated weekly. And remember that you do need to register in advance. You can't just hop into a webinar. So please visit this page often. It is updated quite often with all the new offerings. We have a large amount of webinars going on at the moment. And we do, as I said in text chat, distribute the resources generated from this webinar to you afterwards, so that you still have access to the links and the things that we talked about if you want to review that, if you feel that we've gone over something quite quickly. So if you do need any further assistance, you are welcome to contact us on any of the channels available. As Shonali said, you are also welcome to take up the offer of assistance with your Vula course design, site design, technicalities. We are here to support you in that particular journey.